Ivan Lewis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've only spoken on rare occasions about Northern Ireland since ceasing to be Shadow Secretary of State in 2015. That isn't because I don't care or feel indifferent to a place and people I grew to have a great deal of affection for. It's partially because I believe it's right to allow one's successors the space to shape their own positions, but if I'm honest, it's also because of my sheer exasperation at the failure of Northern Ireland's politicians to show leadership. The silent majority of people across the sectarian divide in Northern Ireland have had enough of the blame game and the name-calling. They want their politicians to do the job they were elected to do and paid for, to reconstitute the executive and the assembly. This would be the responsible thing for politicians to do in any democracy, but in a society emerging from conflict, the stakes are perpetually higher. In a vacuum, the extremists, rejectionists and terrorists exploit the instability at every opportunity. I didn't use the term post-conflict because that is not appropriate in a society still nursing the traumatic wounds of its past, but also held back by a decade of austerity. So why, Madam Deputy Speaker, are we here once again seeking to neither reconstitute the executive and assembly or impose direct rule? Because, frankly, neither of the two largest parties are willing to make the compromises so essential in any power-sharing system. A commitment to brave and uncomfortable compromises, which existed not so long ago on all sides, to deliver an end to bloody conflict and create a peace process which, for all its imperfections, has stood the test of time. Brexit inevitably is a major obstacle to progress, when Sinn Féin and the DUP hold such polar opposite views. But as an ardent campaigner to Remain, I believe the result of the referendum must be respected and implemented. I also believe leaving with no deal would be a massive risk to the economy of the United Kingdom. But I also believe, as has been said by some honourable members, the south of Ireland would be the biggest losers from such an outcome. I also say gently to some of my friends in the DUP, the people of Northern Ireland in no way gave you a mandate to become fully paid-up members of the ERG. If we are to see progress, it's also important to recognise there are other issues which are salient to the current stalemate, which predate Brexit. Brexit is not only the reason why we have the stalemate we have today. As honourable members have said, and I know this from first-hand experience, Sinn Féin are unwilling to make any of the difficult budgetary decisions required of all political leaders in any society dealing with finite resources. They want to be purist and free to pursue their political ambitions in the south. This means opposing all cuts. If they were part of the leadership in Northern Ireland, they would have to make difficult choices. This could be used against them in the south. Nobody should underestimate the power of that reason in terms of Sinn Féin's current position. I'm sad to say the DUP, despite their domination of the unionist vote, are unwilling to make compromises on some issues which would upset their base undoubtedly. Good leadership. I'll give way.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, and I know that when he was the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, he earnestly engaged and sincerely considered the views of all parties in Northern Ireland, and I think dealt with us all very honourably. But if he had been listening to the course of this debate, would he not recognise that in August 2017 we did compromise? In August 2017 we said set up the institutions and we will legislate for the Irish language, yet it was rebuffed in 26 minutes. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm disappointed to hear that hasn't factored in to his speech, but he can't claim that we weren't prepared to make compromise, nor are we still today.
I thank the honourable gentleman. I have a great deal of respect for his very kind remarks about my period as Shadow Secretary of State. And of course I accept that along this long journey of stalemate, of course there has been a willingness to make some compromises. But it really doesn't ring true to say the reason we're in this position today is exclusively the responsibility of one party or another. That is factually simply untrue. And if the honourable member will allow me to continue with my speech, I will cite some of the other reasons we've been unable to make progress. And I think this is a crucial message to the DUP. Good leadership may be the ability to motivate core supporters, but there's a difference between good and great leadership. Great leadership is a willingness to sometimes say difficult things to one's own supporters. That is the case through history, and in fact, the DUP and other political parties in Northern Ireland in the past have been willing to do so. But there are other factors too that we need to take.
Thank him for giving, and the honourable gentleman will remember his visit to my constituency of Strangford, and in particular to the community groups in Newton Orange. He will recall that visit very, very well. He will also recall, I'm sure, and I'll remind him of such, that they were very much opposed to an Irish language becoming a political tool in the process. And whenever it comes to reflecting that public opinion that's in Strangford and elsewhere, I do so every day, because that's what my constituents are telling me. You don't draw your constituents or try to push them in a way that they don't want to go.
Well, I have massive respect for the honourable gentleman. We agree on so many things. But there are actually occasions when politicians and leaders need to say to their own followers and their own base that actually we need to do things differently in the pursuit of a bigger cause. Now, I accept if the gap grows to such an extent between a politician and the people who support that politician, that will lead to the demise of those politicians inevitably. So it's a difficult calibration to achieve in any dynamic in terms of political relationships. But you know, all the great changes that have been made through political history, the great changes have required at one time or another politicians to say difficult things to their own supporters, particularly in cases of conflict and war and terrorism and a lack of stability. And I'd say, I'll say directly as well to the honourable gentleman, the Irish Language Act I don't even featured in the conversations I had when I visited his constituency, because as other honourable members have said, that is not the burning issue of the day for any section of the population in Northern Ireland, to be frank. It's jobs. It's education, it's health, it's opportunities. It is wrong to say that the Irish Language Act is the be-all and end-all in terms of the nationalist community in Northern Ireland, let alone the other community. I will give way again to the honourable gentleman.
Respect, if we're going to have some honesty from the position in Northern Ireland, we have to look at the facts of the case. Nationalist people do want, nationalist parties do want the Irish language. I'm just saying that the unionist people that we represent don't see it as a burning issue. The honourable gentleman is right. It's health, it's education, it's roads, it's jobs. Those are the key issues. But the nationalist parties see it as their key issue, their number one priority.
I thank the honourable member. I don't personally believe it's a burning issue in terms of compared to those other issues in the nationalist community either, if we're honest in terms of the discussions we have with those communities. And I would say to the honourable gentleman, I wasn't going to mention it in my speech, but I will. I was very proud to have commissioned, when I was a Shadow Secretary of State, the Heenan-Anderson Commission. Deirdre Heenan and Colin Anderson, who did a serious piece of work on tackling social injustice and inequality in Northern Ireland, which is the breeding ground of sectarianism and division. If Northern Ireland doesn't tackle the lack of social justice and lack of equality, that is the breeding ground for the alienated and disenfranchised younger generation. And it's sad that no political party, it wasn't a party political document, it wasn't an ideological document, it's sad that no political party has actually seized that document, which didn't just identify the scale of the problem, but also came up with some very practical and tangible solutions and sought to engage with Deirdre Heenan, Colin Anderson and all the stakeholders in business and civil society who participated in that process to see whether some of those recommendations can be implemented. I want, Madam Deputy Speaker, to move on with my speech now. And I was just counting some of the other factors which has caused the current stalemate. And one that I don't think is mentioned often enough is the fact that the UK and Irish governments have struggled to fulfil their honest broker role since 2010. Tory-led governments in the UK have needed DUP support to govern, informally in the coalition period and subsequently openly in the form of a confidence and supply arrangement. This hasn't just impacted on Brexit, but it's impacted on the willingness of the Westminster government to apply any serious pressure whatsoever on the DUP to compromise. And by the way, this is a very important point. I don't condemn the government or the DUP for the relationship that they have developed. How could I? because this is precisely the relationship that the Labour Party would have sought with the DUP had Ed Miliband had emerged as the leader of the largest party in the 2015 general election. I know that better than anybody else because I was actually leading the work that would have made that possible. So it is somewhat hypocritical when I hear honourable members sometimes on this side attacking either the government or the DUP for the nature of their relationship. Let's be clear about history. In 2015, the Labour Party would have done exactly the same had the political conditions existed.
I thank the honourable member for his candour on the secondary point. I think that is actually the case that the government, or the party wanting to be in government of the day, would try to make those sorts of arrangements. But I think we have to be absolutely fair to the government. It has not tried to use its position to try and get gains out of our support for the confidence and supply arrangement. In fact, it was steadfastly opposed. There's been a brick wall at times between our party and the Secretary of State and the NIO on issues that we wish we could have influence on. And I think it's only fair and proper that that is on the record, that the Secretary of State has kept herself away from those arrangements completely and totally.
Well, I have to say to the honourable gentleman, it is extraordinary in my mind that the Prime Minister failed to avoid alienating the DUP in the context of the position she adopted on Brexit. I would have actually thought that that would have been the top priority of the Prime Minister in terms of the discussions that she had. And what clearly happened in the context of Brexit was a trust issue as much as a substance issue, in that things were said in private that were then the opposite took place in public in terms of the government's position on Brexit. But turning to the specific issue that the honourable gentleman raised, I'm sorry, I don't withdraw my contention that since 2010, the fact that the government of the day here has been dependent on the DUP to be able to govern unofficially in the 2010 to 2015 period, officially beyond 2015, has understandably made that government at a prime ministerial level and possibly a Secretary of State level unwilling to exercise the kind of pressure that was exercised in the past for compromise. That is just a statement of fact. The progress in Northern Ireland that has taken place has significantly been a consequence of the honest broker role that the government in the South and the government here in Westminster have played during that period. And the change of the dynamic, and I'll come on to the government in the South in a minute, but the change of that dynamic has undoubtedly had an impact. And I want to move on to why it's made a difference in the South. It's not just here, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the South, Sinn Féin are now serious political challengers to the two leading parties. This inevitably changes the nature of the relationship and inhibits the trust between the government in the South and Sinn Féin, which has been so important to progress in the past. So to deny that those changes, massive changes in political dynamic, haven't had an impact on the ability to get the different parties to make compromises is simply, I don't think, credible. Does the honourable gentleman want to come in? I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
The honourable member has mentioned Sinn Féin. Would he accept that Sinn Féin's results in the last election in the Republic were nothing short of disastrous?
Well, I think I've got enough, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've got enough problems expressing opinions on the state of politics in the United Kingdom without intruding in private grief in terms of the south of Ireland. I'm not really qualified to make any judgments. What I would say to the honourable gentleman, though, is this. There's no doubt about it that Sinn Féin, a massive factor in their unwillingness to participate in the government in Northern Ireland, is to do with their unwillingness to make tough and difficult decisions, because in the south of Ireland they want to give the impression that such decisions are not required. And if they participated in government in the north of Ireland, they would have to be part of making such difficult decisions. I'll give way to the honourable lady.
I think the honourable gentleman is making some excellent points. Would he not agree with me that with the prospect of a general election looming in Southern Ireland at some point, they will not get back round the Assembly table until there is a general election in Southern Ireland, because it will affect their electoral chances. And so we are making concessions for them here and holding out, hoping they'll get back round the table, but the Southern Ireland scenario is affecting their behaviour.
I think the honourable lady is probably absolutely right. Realpolitik, if Sinn Féin are consistent with the way they've behaved over a number of years now, they will not make any move whatsoever to help reconstitute the executive in the Assembly until that election in the south of Ireland is done and dusted. I think the honourable lady is absolutely right and makes a fair point. The final factor I want to raise, which I think has changed the dynamic, which is going to be uncomfortable for some, And some won't agree with me, but I think it's a factor that shouldn't be underestimated. And I had the benefit of working with some of the individuals concerned. Peter Robinson and Martin McGuinness, whatever people's differences, in their roles as First and Deputy First Minister, were leaders of calibre and pragmatism. I don't believe such leadership exists at the present time. I now want to turn to issues which are inevitably divisive and other honourable members have touched upon. They cannot be put on hold forever. They cannot be put on hold forever. Equal marriage and abortion generate strong feelings in all societies. But this is especially the case where religion has played such a central role in the sectarian divide. I do not support those in this House who want to use the current political stalemate to impose solutions from Westminster. However, courageous leadership from the government would mean using this period to allow the people of Northern Ireland to make their voices heard on these issues. The government should bring forward legislation to hold one referendum covering abortion and equal marriage, and they should be consistent. As with Brexit, they should commit to introducing necessary legislation if the people of Northern Ireland chose to vote for change. I understand those who argue that these issues are about fundamental human rights and therefore shouldn't be subject to a referendum. I also understand why people may be a little cautious about referenda on anything in the present climate. But there is currently no other credible way forward, or one which can achieve a solution in the foreseeable future on these issues which are so divisive. I believe in universal human rights, including the right to religious freedom. But I also believe, and this is very important, societies scarred by conflict require very delicate handling. And wading into these issues as though Northern Ireland is simply like anywhere else, in my view, misses a very important point about societies which are emerging from conflict.
So what would I know about it?
Finally, you're entitled to your opinion. Other people who know as much as you have an entirely different opinion. The honourable member commented from a sedentary position.
Well, I'm happy to make an intervention.
Okay.
The point I was simply making was that, well, 2 points if I might. The first is his constituents in Bury and mine in St Helens who are gay didn't have to win a referendum to allow them to get married to the person they love. And the second point is simply, in terms of my amendment on same-sex marriage, I have given a lot of thought to it and the sensitivities around Northern Ireland, and I don't claim to be an expert on it by any shape or form, but it is something that I have very carefully considered before doing so.
I absolutely don't dispute the fact that my honourable member, in every intervention he's made on Northern Ireland over a very long period of time, it's his home, it's not my home, seeks to be sensitive at every single opportunity. But I would say to my honourable friend that referendum is not the ideal solution. But if you believe in gay marriage, if you believe the rules need to be changed in terms of abortion to equalise in Northern Ireland compared to the rest of the United Kingdom, that is not going to be achieved, in my view, in terms of parliamentary arithmetic, through the amendments that are being proposed during the course of this legislation. It is not going to be achieved. So if you genuinely believe in those things, rather than simply we're going to have perpetual debate about this, and in addition to that we have stalemate in the Executive and the Assembly, my solution, if you actually believe in those things, then the solution I'm proposing actually provides an opportunity to achieve a breakthrough that is not possible to be achieved, both in the current stalemate and in terms of the parliamentary maths. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. And to defend his position, although it's not one I necessarily agree with, by the way, at least what the referendum would do would refer back to the people of Northern Ireland. It would be perceived as immensely arrogant were it for this House to dictate to the people of Northern Ireland on subjects which we've already acknowledged across the House are extremely sensitive.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I entirely agree with the honourable gentleman that this should be constitutionally a matter for the people of Northern Ireland. I don't think we should disregard the history of Northern Ireland or the nature of the sensitivities, the fragility which prevails. Too many people refer to Northern Ireland as a post-conflict society. Well, what that means often is you tick boxes saying it's resolved, it's all sorted. Northern Ireland has moved on. Anybody who lives in Northern Ireland cares about it, knows that that's not the case. As more than anybody, my honourable friend gets that and understands that. But when we consider these issues, we have to take account of those realities. Now, I understand that my solution is not going to be supported by many. Campaigners are going to say, we believe in universal human rights, and anything other than that is a dilution of our principles. But the reality is, there are not going to be, in the current climate with the parliamentary maths and the stalemate in terms of the Assembly and the Executive, there is not going to be gay marriage or changes to abortion law in Northern Ireland. That's a fact. We can move as many amendments as we want in this place, but that is the reality, as is the position of the current government. So I'm suggesting to the government that they take a brave and courageous step on these sensitive issues. They seriously give consideration to the option of a referendum, and as part of that, that the government would have to commit to bringing forward legislation to enact whatever the outcome of that referendum, if the outcome required legislative change. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will support the government tonight because I believe it to be the least worst solution. But there needs to be a wake-up call to the leading parties in Northern Ireland. They think that the regrettable failure of leadership can go on forever because they dominate the vote in their respective communities. That is the political reality of Northern Ireland. But around the world, the certainties of elites and establishments are being shattered. We've seen Brexit in our own country. We saw Donald Trump defeat Hillary Clinton. Two examples where elites and establishment who think that they are in the ascendancy were sent crumbling. So if those leaders carry on failing in their duty to run Northern Ireland, they may wake up one morning to find that the silent majority of unionists and nationalists has been raised in support of credible alternatives. Now, that may be hard to believe, but never say never in the context of current turbulence around the world. Northern Ireland should and can have a great future, but its people are being let down by its leaders. Victims of violence and institutional abuse are neither getting justice or closure. Too many young people are being left behind as austerity means too many of the promises of the peace process haven't been delivered. And I would say to the Secretary of State, this is a point that also should be made, that the investment that Northern Ireland should have had post the peace process has not been delivered to the level it should have been delivered as a consequence of austerity, despite some of the deals that have been done specifically with the Democratic Unionist Party. Overall, the people running Northern Ireland have not had the peace dividend they were promised as a consequence of austerity, and this needs to be taken into account in future budgetary decisions about Northern Ireland. It's also sad that politics is sharpening the sectarian divide when it should be healing and weakening the divides of the past. The silent majority in Northern Ireland, Madam Deputy Speaker, deserve better. It's time that politicians on all sides did their duty and put the people of Northern Ireland first.
Kevin Robinson.